Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Let'sLearnThisTogether.com. Today I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of GameMaker Studio 2.3. It is a huge update with a lot of changes both to the IDE and GML, and it is a separate piece of software that you can install, which is actually super nice because then you can run it right alongside the default GMS, so you can compare the two and you can open up projects in the new one as long as you back them up safely first, because it does say it might corrupt your projects, so back them up first. But I'm going to be giving you my impressions of just a quick look and showcasing some of the new features, because there's actually a lot new and there's some pretty big changes that are happening. So let's jump to it. So this is GameMaker Studio 2.3. The actual interface itself really hasn't changed. All of the new features are viewable just like how you've already seen them, except when it brings up an entire new workspace in sequences, which I'll get to in a moment. But the first thing you're going to notice is that the resources on the right over here are no longer resources. It is now an asset browser. So at the top, you have quick access to your recent things, favorite things, the room order, saved searches, tags, and then game options under here. So that's kind of cool. And then down here, you would notice that things look quite a bit different. Their icons are gone, and you can color some things. So this is no longer just a modified resource tree. It is something entirely different. Instead, it is all just groups. And the thing is that the groups are just folders, and you can put anything inside of them. So right here, I have a folder called Objects, where I have an object, but in Shaders, I have a sprite. And that's because this is just a folder, and it can hold any kind of resource that you want, any sort of asset. You can color code both the folder and specific assets, so if you have them together, then you can easily identify them and find them. And if you don't want a folder, you can just come in and delete the entire folder. Now you can completely customize this. At first, I wasn't quite sure what I thought about it, but the more I use it, the more I'm starting to enjoy the fact that you can actually group resources that you use together. So you can put everything for your main character in one folder. All the sound effects, the sprites, the objects, the scripts, all of it, which is pretty cool. And you can really start to organize your assets a whole lot more than you could in previous GameMaker versions. So that's kind of cool. The recent Windows down here still is awful unless you go in it and actually change the setting, but that's nothing new. So that's the asset browser. It looks like it's just a little different, but it's actually completely different. Anytime you want to right-click and create, you have an option to create all of the assets that are available. So there are some new assets that we have to talk about. There's animation curve and sequence. So these things are some of the new features to the IDE that they've added. And the sequence is really the big one. Yo-Yo Games actually put out an entire playlist on YouTube about sequences. So let's go in and take a quick look at this. Sequences are a way, from my understanding, to incorporate everything except objects, so sprites, sound effects, everything else, and completely control how they look and have a complete scene created. In my mind, I see myself creating cutscenes with this, and that's because it is for animation, not for actually animating like the sprites and figuring out exactly what they do. When you create a new sprite, you have a different look. So down here, if I make a new sprite, it looks a little bit different, but for the most part, it's going to be exactly the same. Like if I went in and actually wanted to edit the image, it's the same thing here. They haven't changed this at all. It's just that the actual view here looks a little bit different, and they're going much more for like professional animation software that's already available. And I don't know how this is going to compare. I'm going to have to wait and see other people's opinions because I don't do professional animation, but this looks pretty awesome. So inside of a sequence, you have full control with keyframes on everything that has to do with a sprite. So you can see here that if I were to press play, let's see, play is right here. I've got this animated character attacking, and I've got their keyframes spread out. I've got a 5-second animation here. And over here in the corner, you can see that I am adjusting their position as we move along. Each of these little white diamonds is a new spot for the player to be in. And if I click anywhere else, I can actually grab the diamond of the player and make it so that now, let's zoom in here, at 2 seconds, 467, now the character will be right here. So I can add in any sprites I want, move them around, and animate them as much as I want. And I have total control over all of these properties here. So position, rotation, color multiply, image index, image speed, origin, and scale. You can alter all of those with keyframes and do a lot. And then you can just put these sequences in the room. So if I come over here, and I already have my sequence in my room, you can see this is sequence 1. If I press F5, this sequence will run because it's the same size as the default room. So there we go. He's just running around. But you can start to imagine that if you put in all of these sprites and you wanted to have a complete custom scene play out, you can do that. And what's really cool is they've built in ways for this sequence to send out broadcasts. So you can send out a broadcast message at specific points within this sequence that is basically a string that your object can pick up on. So if we go to objects, there is a new event under other broadcast message. So you can pick up the broadcast message sent out by the sequence and then do something based on that. Same thing kind of here. You can add moments, and these moments you can call scripts or functions as they are actually called now at that specific moment. So let's go into scripts because that's the next big change here. When you make a new one, it actually has a comment right at the top that says scripts have changed. So no longer are scripts single-use, one function resources. They are now a container for as many functions as you want. So the thing they suggested was renaming this to something like enemy AI. And then you have all of the enemy AI functions inside of here. And that's because the functions are global in scope, so you can use them anywhere. They get created before the game starts. Everything inside of the script is global, and you can use them anywhere. You can, of course, set in arguments and parameters, just like you're used to doing with scripts, but you just put them right in here. They can return values, but this is actually a really big step forward for GML, becoming a higher level language. It's adding functionality that has been in really every other language for the longest time. Now we have functions, which is pretty cool. So that's really nice. And then the other thing they've added in is structs. So I'm going to bring up the manual here. The manual is totally redone as well, which is pretty nice. But structs are a way of putting all of your data together. They're almost like objects already, but you can make them and then you can use them anywhere that you want. So you create a struct like this, and it can contain any kind of data that you want. It can even contain functions that you create for that struct specifically, and structs can even contain other structs, which can get very confusing very quickly. But a struct is a great way to put lots of pieces of data together and be able to manipulate it, and then you can use it pretty much just like any other variable as long as you access it correctly, which is pretty cool. The other really nice thing that they've done is updated arrays. So if we click on arrays here, they no longer have what we would call multi-dimensional arrays. Instead, multi-dimensional arrays are just arrays within arrays. And this is how you now access them. So if you followed along with my advanced tutorial, which is available on my website, letslearnthistogether.com, or you have worked with multi-dimension arrays in GML, you know that it is really frustrating to try and access data that is nested inside of the array, because you have to set a variable to the array spot first, and then you have to access it inside of there, and then you're finally checking it, and it's all very annoying. But with this, now every array is just one-dimensional arrays inside of one-dimensional arrays and so on and so forth, and you can access them with just bracket after bracket. And then you can even go further and you can do dot notation on side of those brackets and go on forever and ever and ever. So now it is so much easier to use multi-dimensional arrays, including data structures like a DS grid. Now you can access the DS grid just like an array with just having multiple brackets, and it's so much nicer. And then the last thing is the animation curves. So the animation curves are used inside of sequences to specifically change how something is animated, because inside of the sequence right now, it is a linear curve from point A to point B. But if you wanted it to be, he's here on frame 1, and then on frame 2, he's instantly over here, or like on frame 10, he moves on frame 9 to here, you can use the animation curves to set exactly how that is supposed to work. So it goes hand in hand with sequences, and that's really all there is to it. It's just another part of sequences. But that's my first look for you and my impression. I think I'm going to like 2.3, the updates, especially with functions and arrays and adding structs, is going to make GML a much better language, much more powerful, and the updates to do sequences and big animations, well, it's only good stuff in my opinion. But the more I use it, the more I will let you know and give you feedback and give you some tutorials on some of these new features. Just remember that if you import a project, make a backup before you do that, because GameMaker says it could corrupt that project in a way that is unrecoverable. So don't load anything that you do not have a backup of. And that's what I've got for you. Thanks so much for joining me. If you are interested in more tutorials from me, check out my website at letslearnthistogether.com, where you can find more GameMaker Studio tutorials from beginner to advanced. And you can also find a podcast on there where I interview other developers from all over the tech industry. Thanks for joining me, and as I always say, keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later. A huge thank you to all of my patrons who go above and beyond in being awesome and supporting me on Patreon. If you enjoyed this content and you want to see more from me, please consider supporting me on Patreon.